Welcome to TFR Let's Talk. I'm your host, Swapnil Bhartiya, and my next guest is Greg Osuri, CEO of Akash Network. Greg, it's great to have you on the show.
Great to be here.
You folks call yourself Airbnb of cloud. So I want to understand, what do you folks do? Because you also focus more on decentralized cloud. So I want to just understand the story, what problem you saw in the cloud that you wanted to solve, that you created Akash Network.
When we built Akash Network, the premise was cloud as it stands is, the fabric of a society, right? All your data, all your computation is moving to the cloud. If not, it's already there. And obviously, demand can be better exhibited with the kind of valuations we are seeing with Amazon's and Microsoft. Amazon Web Services alone being valued at around $500 billion, right? So there's clearly a lot of demand. And while the demand is there, we have enormous supply that's being unlocked in data centers because turns out 85% to 95% of the compute in data centers remain unused. And the reason for that is you normally plan for peak and you always want the peak capacity to exist, but you probably use that peak loads maybe, 1 week or depending on what kind of business you are, but very minimally, right? So you have this unused capacity that's locked up, and Akash's vision is to unlock that capacity to a marketplace and create a cloud that's open and that's more equitable and that's built on the ethos of open systems as open source software programmers ourselves, and a price point that's market driven instead of institutional driven. So Akash Network is the first open source, peer-to-peer, permissionless and self-sovereign cloud.
When we use the word cloud, it could mean a lot of things for different people. Some even call SaaS cloud. Cloud is also a lot of companies who just offer storage. They also call themselves cloud, which is, because a big generic term. So when I look at Akash Network, what kind of cloud am I looking at?
So when I say cloud here in particular, I mean cloud service provider. So cloud as it's, cloud could mean thing. It could be an iCloud or it could be a SaaS cloud, like you said. But it's essentially a computer sitting somewhere else and running the program for you that you access, right? So and store your data. So cloud in the traditional sense of how we use is essentially a cloud service provider. And that comprises right now about 4 major companies that have majority of the market share. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Alibaba. I believe they control about 80% of market share. I'm talking about that particular thing.
Cloud today, as we were discussing earlier, does make it easy for people just put everything on the credit card and start using it. It has created a couple of problems there. One is that if you do have a bigger team, one team may be using someone else's cloud, other team may be using, so we do talk about multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, but sometimes it's not as planned as it seems. Sometimes just 4 different people in the company, they are using different cloud. That is one. Number 2 is that since it's very easy to put in a credit card, you forget it is also creating a lot of cloud waste in a way as well. So when I look at Akash, I'm pretty sure that you are aware of this problem too. So how do you ensure that because cost effectiveness is one of the factors that you mentioned up there, so that people, they are using, because even if they are not paying, you have allocated the resource to XYZ customers and someone else could have been using it. So can you talk about this aspect? And also if you can also talk that the whole multi-cloud that people love to talk about.
Right. So multi-cloud, so a big problem, like you said, it's over usage of services without really knowing what you're using the services for. And sometimes you use services in multiple different cloud providers that provide the same functionality, but you're not sharing the functionality, so you end up paying. And we see, it's a different problem than what we're currently addressing, but we will. That doesn't mean we're not going to address in the future. Like that problem you're talking about is more like, well, if you look at your Amazon bill, like you don't know half the things what you're paying for. Right? So this micro things that just sneak up on you. What Akash does differently is it takes a reverse approach where you have to pay the bill up front in order to use it. So in case you don't, end up using your budget, your money gets back, but also there's a limit in terms of how much you can use. So it becomes a lot more easy to control than your traditional pay using a credit card, pay the bill later, right? So it puts the user in a lot more control. And second is it makes a multi-cloud very simple because it just gives you one interface. Doesn't really matter what cloud underneath you're using. This one interface you access from. So that becomes a lot more easy to share than multiple different configuration languages for each cloud, that it becomes nearly impossible for two teams working remotely to share, right? So I think making the technology stack a lot more collaborative using a federated configuration language and changing the pricing model to a more of a prepaid model versus a postpaid model gives the user a lot more control in terms of knowing what they and being able to predict what they're paying, essentially. And of course, the pricing is a lot more transparent. It's not opaque like Amazon's, or they're just like nickel and dime you on little things, and by the time you see your bill, it's like humongous. You have no idea what you paid for. The pricing is a lot more transparent and a lot more open here. In fact, more transparent in a way because you can actually see the competitive pricing as well.
Actually, you need to be a mathematician if you want to calculate the pricing of,
Exactly. That's our thesis, right? Like the whole thing about you saving money on the cloud is a fallacy, right? It's a different problem. You end up spending a lot more money, actually. And if you see this, it's a trend now. There's a repatriation of data centers. Like any high growth Silicon Valley company, like Dropbox or Snapchat, they're actually moving back to data centers for a reason. And Akash is trying to address the cost problem. Well, moving back to a data center also means you have capital expenses, and we are trying to give you some sense of relief and you're going to have the whole like peak underutilized problem as well, right? So giving you the sense of monetization for your underutilized resources while ensuring that you have sovereignty on both your performance as well as your cost.
I want to talk a bit about kind of risks of hyper cloud providers. One of the things that is that applications, they are kind of you can move from here to there. What really matters is data. That's what we care about. As much as we talk about API driven, you can move your workload. These hyperscalers, they also know this reality. So that's why data gravity, as much as you want, it does lock you into a vendor. So when you talk about Akash, how much do you see, despite all those marketing mumbo jumbo, that there is a risk of getting logged into a particular cloud vendor, even if you want to have a multi-cloud story? And how does Akash try to mitigate or solve that problem?
So data gravity issue is real, and the data gravity is because of the pricing policies cloud has adopted. Like they give you heavy egress cost versus ingress cost, right? And the reason for that is like, well, they want your data to stay in the cloud. So we're trying to, now that is a problem I can't say we have a solution for, because Akash doesn't have control over its providers. Providers independently have their own pricing model. But what we're trying to do is price out in a way that is developer first or the user first, right? So we are going to introduce we don't really have a bandwidth marketplace right now. It's compute, memory, storage. And we are looking at the bandwidth problem very seriously and hopefully present a pricing model that's equitable and a lot more easy, that encourages like data transfer, right? So yeah, the data gravity problem is not a technological problem. It is a pricing problem. And that's very important to keep in mind and the way that, and the root of that problem is the egress cost, right? Even the bandwidth is supposedly same egress or ingress, right? But it's just the pricing policies that dictate it. So I don't know, maybe there's a ingress price that you may end up paying with Akash, and that's fine because paying ingress means you pay less egress, right? So it's always a balance at the end of the day. And for us to ensure that the providers are profitable and providers are actually sustainable and profitable, at the same time, the cost is acceptable to our customers is where we focus our energies on. But what's important is that this is the first time that we are having a conversation on these problems. And so if you look at our biggest provider right now is Equinix. Equinix is the largest interconnected data center network in the world. And we're working with them. Like we're working with them with this with the bandwidth marketplace, how to enable that. And they're not the only providers. We have other ones we're working on, Orion and 6x7 and other, data centers across the world. Some of the new ones like Compute North and things like that, right? So we were talking to you, and as we are like onboarding them, one big initiative is working on the bandwidth marketplace.
Last year, because of this pandemic, a lot of companies, organizations, they rushed towards cloud. Suddenly, they accelerated their digital transformation journey because they could not survive without cloud. And when you rush into things, there are a lot of missteps, a lot of mistakes are made. You don't have a very coherent strategy. But now I think things are settling down. They are kind of through that hangover period. So from Akash's perspective, what do you see in the market where, all these companies who rushed in, what is their, I will not call it buyer's remorse, but, all those, glossy picture of cloud, they are getting now, kind of mystify. So can you talk about what you have seen there?
To concur to your problem, a big challenge we see today is people thinking cloud is the end-all solution to all your problems, right? And I think what the current pandemic has proved out to be true. So folks, the big problem we see is the resiliency problem, we call it, like just moving something from your computer to the cloud, thinking the cloud is going to solve all your problems without thinking of a resilient or redundant architectures can get you in trouble. And on top of that, you have the cost problem, right? So people thinking that, there's an intention that there's inherent understanding that cloud will solve your cost problem from your data center, and having to move to the cloud because of that is just a fallacy, right? So I think overall, bringing more people into the cloud is better for Akash in general speaking, because, once people realize the current cloud service model is inherently broken, and now if you're really thinking about how to solve the problem, I think Akash provides a very viable alternative. So it's great overall for a decentralized world, because exposing the structural problems for centralized infrastructure is exposes more to the benefits of decentralization.
If I ask you, how would you define decentralized cloud? And I mean, actually, you alluded to that earlier, but I wanted to just summarize in the one answer. And what are the benefits that you see for users of a decentralized cloud?
So a decentralized cloud is essentially a network where the computation resources that serves the network are not under a single control, right? There is no single point of control. There's no single point of failure. It's inherently distributed in the sense, like, if you have to really define what a blockchain versus a database is, the big difference is a blockchain is where you're politically decentralized. That means there's no central organization that's dictating what goes into the platform or not. Your data, you're architecturally decentralized. That means your data and your computation is not into one silo, but actually distributed. But your state is shared, right? It's a shared state system across the globe, right? So if you have to really define what a decentralized cloud is something that has all these three attributes, right? And what are the benefits? Well, the primary benefit of a system that's completely distributed is, you're going to have price that's market driven. And you're going to have a product that puts users off the system first, because any change to the system has to go through the rigorous public approval, right? So one of the things that we saw with the latest outages, like happened with Cloudflare, it happens a lot with Amazon services going down. And the outages are not because they're technologically poor, but it's just because there's a misconfiguration by someone in the company that had no oversight, or if there was oversight, that was not sufficiently scrutinized to support a public infrastructure. Like if you look at cloud as a public infrastructure, a public utility, right? We don't have the same anywhere close level of scrutiny the other public utilities like power or water has, right? So what decentralization really brings back is like, well, we need that level of scrutiny. We need that level of political decentralization to have, if you want to define a cloud as a mission critical utility for less public utility, right? So that's what decentralization is all about. When we recognize cloud is important. Now it's important to take back the cloud from oligopolies, for lack of a better word.
When you talk about decentralized, I want to understand how does it work? Because if I am not wrong, if I just take the Airbnb model, there are people who are offering their own compute, storage, or network, and then you make a whole a mesh of these kind of network, and then you kind of, I don't know how the internal technology work, where you break all the compute that I need, redistribute it. So can you talk about what does your network look like?
Akash, as it stands today, is a container-first platform. So you define a container, you define your workload. You package a container, you push the container, and you use something called an SDL language, which stands for Stack Definition Language, which is a language we created to define your topology as to where you want this container to deploy, what are different attributes for a data center to run this container, the configuration, whatnot. And then you essentially, more importantly, you set the price that you're willing to pay. So you post this on chain in an auction a reverse auction happens at that point where the providers bid for your workload. And you choose the best provider. Usually price is the main driver, but you have other attributes like quality of service attributes that you can filter off from, right? So, and you choose what provider you deploy, and then the step after is something called lease creation, where you get a lease that gets created between you and the provider in a peer-to-peer manner. So the Akash disappears from there, and it gives you a protocol as to how to communicate back and forth with this provider. But essentially, you have a direct relationship without a middleman here, directly with the provider. So if you want Equinix Metal, for example, you have a direct relationship here, right? And then you get all the SSH access, all the access you want. And then the asset transfer happens. It happens automatically upon initiating, upon authorization from the user. Asset transfer, in the sense your code and your data gets transferred, right? And in a peer-to-peer manner, so there's no like middleman, there's no one watching you in the middle. So now you have other services like you mentioned, Storage and for storage, NewCipher for KMS, Handshake for DNS. All these services right now, the way people are using is just manual integration. So we see a lot of use cases where, in fact, right now that are deployed in the wild, where you have users, running their MySQL and with a WordPress on Akash, and backing that up onto Saya or Skynet, right? Which is a storage network, which is like S3 essentially, right? It's not low latency, it's high latency, but it's an object storage network, right? And then, bootstrapping your database from that in case you have a new cluster that you're deploying in. So, and again, once you have an IP address or a host name, taking that host name and configuring that into a DNS provider like Handshake, which is also decentralized DNS, right? So you have this almost like an alternative like world that's fully decentralized using decentralized technologies that is like growing in adoption. But tomorrow, what we plan to have, which is going to be a big paradigm shift for us, is like right now, if you want to run a MySQL, you still have to manage yourself, which is not ideal, right? And that's where the big service providers really, really thrive, because you have managed services, you pay a premium for. That is coming to Akash, but we're going to do that in a decentralized way. It's not a simple thing to solve, but it's definitely something that we're very passionate about. In a scenario like that, you can have low latency storage providers in the network that is managing the storage or managing any higher level abstraction like MySQL and whatnot for you, adding the special sauce, and you can get to leverage that in a low latency environment where it's being run in the same data center, right? So to answer your question, right now it's a very basic platform, but it is a multi-cloud platform that's fully functioning. And right now we're adding about 10 active applications a day from launching from 3 months ago, in about 150 deploys a day. It was about 5 active applications a day not too long ago. So it's a growing platform, but as we evolve to a much wider subset of users, the decentralized marketplaces for backend services are going to fulfill, hopefully, the gap from our centralized providers. Amazon right now has about 250 services, but when Akash is fully mature and decentralized, where anybody can add any service that they want, and there is a way to verify these, and there's all these amazing quality ensuring attributes, I don't see how we can have a much more extensive catalog than any of the current cloud providers.
If you look at the user base, or what are the use cases that are ideal for this kind of decentralized cloud, that would be great.
We're seeing three cohorts of users right now, right? So, and that's seeing a lot of product market fit for Akash. The first cohort of users are blockchain, our community itself. So blockchain runs nodes and RPC servers and API servers and whole set of services that should not go on centralized just from an ideological standpoint, right? And also from a developer experience standpoint, booting up one of these, node infrastructures that has multi-party computation, this advanced topologies, is very hard on the centralized cloud. So we're making it because this is our immediate user base. We obviously focused on them in terms of optimizing for user experience. So we're seeing quite a bit of growth there. Recently, there was a new DEX, or decentralized exchange, that was launched called Osmosis. It's a very popular exchange in the proof of stake ecosystem. That was launched purely on Akash. It's Akash first launch. And we are very proud of that because they chose Akash over Amazon, right? And Akash could fulfill their needs to run a full-on decentralized exchange. So we're seeing quite a bit of adoption there. And the second area we're seeing adoption is in the anti-deplatforming league. So as you know, deplatforming is a rampant problem. It's not secret that a sitting US president was deplatformed, but it's not what side of the political spectrum you fall on. The fact that there is a platform that has so much power is disturbing, right? So, Amazon shutting down Parler and other websites. So there's a whole segment of users that, and what's crazy is, forgetting a political spectrum, what's crazy is deplatforming is getting weaponized by state actors against legitimate companies, right? So people are using Akash as a disaster recovery mechanism. So in case, though, your primary use case is still Amazon's and your clouds, of course, we don't have the capabilities that Amazon provides, but in case anything bad happens, you have a backup that you don't have to go, scramble at the end, right? So we have the second set of users that's pretty growing in that segment. And the third set of users that we see actually growing way bigger than anything else is the arbitragers, we call them. So the arbitragers are just pure compute arbitraging, so miners. So we have a lot of miners using the network. Sadly, miners are, it's all about dollars for them, right? So you get low cost compute that's 1/3 lower than Amazon. Sure. So Monero miners are there, Pocket miners are there, just a lot of CPU, hard encryption functions, things like that. We're seeing quite a bit of use cases there because it's inherently a chip shortage, I believe. So these can't, and because most of the machines on Akash are, in fact, all of them are actually bare metal. So you have higher throughput in case, and it's optimal for running a lot of miners. So we're seeing strong use cases in three cohorts of customers. Unfortunately, Akash is one of those systems where we don't know the customer because the permissionless system. It's very hard to actually build a CRM for a customer. We don't have their email addresses or even their names, as a matter of fact. So all the information that I talked to you was voluntarily disclosed to us. So by our community, by looking at a chat groups, people will have trouble running this. Then we know you're actually running this, right? So as far as we know, those three cohorts are we seeing significant growth in.
Greg, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about Akash Network and also actually the whole distributed cloud landscape, the risks of using hyperscalers. And thanks for sharing those insights. I would love to have you back on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.